Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Oh boy.
Okay. Nathaniel Drew. Hey guys, how are you? I hope you're doing well. My name's Connor. If you're new, the link to the original video top of the description. Below that, Discord, Patreon, other PO box, all the things. Let's give this a go. It's great. I've seen at least one video of Nathaniel Drew's before, and it was very good. So yeah, I'm excited. Let's do it.
How do you feel the British perceive Americans?
I feel like there's quite a lot of, I hate to say it, but mockery involved.
I think a lot of people think Americans are extreme.
Do you think that the British think that they're better than Americans?
I think some do, yeah.
There's a lot to make fun of, I think.
We're also fantastic at queuing as well. That's another great thing about us.
Rubbing me the wrong way because they're too extra. It doesn't seem like it's genuine.
Today, I'm in London to get to the bottom of a very important question. For as long as I can remember, I have had the sense that the British look down on Americans. This is a generalization, and therefore doesn't apply to everyone, but it's a strong enough trend that I felt I needed to investigate this further. Here's a quote from Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, that perfectly captures the feeling that I have about this. With some, the anti-American sentiment ran very hot. I was reminded of my childhood, when people warned me all the time about Americans. Too loud, too rich, too happy, too confident, too direct, too honest. I'm very curious what people are going to...
I'm just curious what I thought. I like these Americans. I like it. Strange time to be pro-American. Most of the world wasn't. Certainly not Britain. Many Brits despised the American war in Afghanistan and resented being dragged into it. But some of the anti-American sentiment ran very hot. I was reminded of my childhood when people warned me all the time about Americans. Too loud, too rich, happy, confident, direct, honest. Nah, I always thought. Yanks didn't beat around about the bush. Didn't fill the air with polite snorts and throat clearings before coming to the point. Whatever was on their mind, they'd spit it out like a sneeze. And while that could be problematic at times, I usually found it preferable to the alternative. No one's saying what they truly felt. Oh, okay. So it's not taking it. He's okay. The creator of the video is trying to make a point on this statement, and so trying to take it into context maybe shouldn't work. Never mind. Okay.
People warn me all the time about Americans. Too loud, too curious, too happy, too confident, too direct, too honest. I'm very curious what people are going to have to say about this. I have a feeling I'm onto something. Okay, so having said that, let's start talking to some people. Shooting a video for YouTube. Could I ask you guys a question? This will be really great.
Before they go forward, oh, he's getting nose here. I really appreciate. I noticed this very well of Nathaniel, right? That he seems very logical. He doesn't seem like someone who wants to go out and prove that Brits don't think this way or prove that America is really. He just seems to go a really scientific, genuine way, and I like that, and I'm more curious to see the video because of that.
You hate it? Okay, that's okay.
I'm sorry.
Hope that makes sense.
Today, huh?
No, it's not. I'm wondering if I could just get a moment.
I've got too much time.
Off to a very slow
Laughs in
start.
British.
That's okay. Let's just change up the spot because I'm feeling like there's enough projections in that 100-meter radius.
You know, I always feel really terrible that everyone's first attitude is, oh, you're from America, are you? Oh, okay. You know, which is always a bit, you always feel a bit bad about that because I'm not entirely sure why we still do that, but you know.
Yeah. How do you feel perceived as Americans by the British here in London?
A big, stupid, bellowing oaf. Really? Yeah, genuinely. I always feel like I have to apologize for
Don't
being Americans. Like, I
overcompensate.
know my accent's the worst thing you'll hear today, but can I just order a coffee?
Okay, I'll never be like that. That is almost like just as kind of, I don't know if cringy is the right word, but this is almost as bad to me as someone who's just like, America's awesome. We're perfect. Oh, Europe. Just, you know, don't be all full like that, but don't also just be like so ashamed of it. That's weird. I would definitely never do
Being
that.
Americans, like I know my accent's the worst thing you'll hear today, but can I just order a coffee?
My experience, I feel like, has been a little bit different. I think that might be somewhat informed by the fact that I'm a student here. At first, there was a bit of a learning curve. Like when I would speak loudly on the tube, I would kind of get looks, and people would tell me like, "You're being American, like can you maybe not?"
There's definitely sort of a sense that there is a lot of difficult things going on in America, and that America potentially could be quite a difficult place to live, especially if you're of color or from the Middle East.
I have to admit, the inspiration to make this video came when I moved to Europe. As I've explored in previous videos on this channel, many Europeans have mixed to negative views of Americans as dumb and uncultured. But to my surprise, the same goes for the British. I've come to realize that the only people that see the British as intelligent and sophisticated are the Americans. Many Europeans, like the Portuguese or the Spanish, see a very different reality. The British that go off on holiday to get extremely drunk and break things. The British that are isolationist with Brexit.
So, are the British to Europeans like what Americans are to the British? Kind of, I feel like the French to the British are kind of like the British to us. So I don't know about that, but that's pretty funny. I do sort of see. Hey, let me say it this way. Imagine this is kind of how I see Britain and Europe as an American. Like, imagine you're going to a party where you don't know anyone except for one person who you kind of know and can like fit you in, and that's like Britain is that friend at a party who I will go to first so they can kind of introduce me to the rest of the people, if that makes sense.
British that don't learn foreign languages, that stick to their native tongue. Wait a second, I thought to myself. That's what Americans do. Other people do this as well?
How dare they copy us?
I kid, of course. Still, it does feel like the Brits act like the Americans of Europe, but I am certain that is not something that they'd like to hear said about them. I mean,
please, guys, Europeans, not the British. You can't say this, okay? You're in our boat, or the British, I'd be curious too. But is that true? Because that's really funny.
No offense, I am American after all. Does that not prove my point though? No one wants to stoop to the level of Americans. I felt I had to get my answers directly from the source.
My perception is that the UK is 1 foot in Europe, 1 foot like in the Americas. It feels like it should be in the middle of the Atlantic. Do you agree with that?
I think that's a pretty conclusive idea. Yeah, I think that's definitely true, because a lot of people wouldn't even class England as being in Europe. You know, even in England, when you talk about going to Europe, no one ever thinks you mean Doncaster. They always think you mean Germany.
This is so funny because if I were saying like if I intended to go to Europe, to like Germany maybe, or France or Italy or Spain, I might say, like, if someone asked me, oh yeah, I'm going to Europe. But if I'm going to the UK, I think I would say I'm going to the UK, not I'm going to Europe. Isn't I'm learning things about myself right now.
You get going to Europe. No one ever thinks you mean Doncaster. They always think you mean Germany. You do get some perception that everyone's some sort of like a Valley Girl accent or something like that, and I think that annoys people quite a lot. But then again, it's the same way that English people are often perceived as all sort of being from London. You know, the American dream, making yourself better and being seen to be self-improving, and it's a lot about earning money and being the best you can and going to the gym and all these kind of things.
Do you think that's, are you saying it's positive or negative?
I think it's a positive thing for Americans, but I think the way it's perceived is often everyone goes, oh, get out of my face, you know, because no one likes to enjoy someone else's success, at least in England anyway. I think in America it's probably very different. Oh, great, you got a promotion. Fucking bastards, you know.
The identity of being American is like such a thing.
Right.
That I don't think other places have that as much.
I don't think people are necessarily dumb, and I don't think it's a question of being dumb. I think it's just that there's this idea of like, yeah, being the best. To think that like people in America, depending on where you're born, you can have access to care or not, it's frightening. And I don't know how you can speak about being the best when you can't even make sure that everybody's like taken care of. Are you treating everyone the same way in America? No, not everyone is treated the same way, just like not everyone is treated the same way in Europe.
Who's cooking?
Having been to America.
Yeah, I mean, okay. There is this feeling that it almost feels like America is a Truman Show to the rest of the world sometimes. Like, you run into like I guess because Americans just don't want to learn that much about the rest of the world, but it seems like if you talk to people not from America, they know much more about you and your culture and your country than you know about theirs. And so it's almost like it's awkward, like, you know this much about America, I'm assuming just because a lot has to do with pop culture and stuff like that, and TV shows and a lot of movies. Not to say there aren't, you know, amazing European or British movies, but there is that sort of feeling that Americans can't really criticize or praise what they don't even know. And yeah, I don't know.
A lot, they often ask.
Just like not everyone is treated the same way in Europe.
Having been to America a lot, they often ask, obviously as a joke, but just like, do you know the royal family or anything like that?
So do you feel that generally, this big generalization, there's mockery towards the Americans and Americans towards the British is more like cute. We think you're cute.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah.
How do you feel about Americans thinking you're cute?
Well, it can be taken as a compliment, obviously, but if they think that we're, like, as a country, not really a force to be reckoned with, then just because we do all these, like, things that date back to long before the US was established, it's not really relevant that they can mock us for that.
Is it condescending, would you say?
A little bit.
Or ignorant?
More ignorant. It doesn't, like, hurt me. You know?
How do you feel?
Guys, I am the opposite there. On that point, I am the exact opposite of what he just said. In fact, it's the fact that you have so much more tradition and the fact that our traditions in government and politics are directly taken from you. That causes admiration, not looking down. That's looking up, honestly. And so, yeah, that's not a. I thought the opposite there.
Did you say?
A little bit.
Or ignorant?
More ignorant. It doesn't, like, hurt me. You know?
How do you feel Americans perceive the British, first of all?
They kind of look down on us.
You feel that?
I feel like Americans think like they're on top of everything, and there's always competition between the two.
So do you feel like the British have a chip on their shoulder a little bit because of that?
Yeah, a lot.
What do you think the British are better at than Americans?
Yeah, polite, really.
More polite?
Yeah, more talkative, more helpful.
Sorry, I'm sorry. He looks a lot like that F1 driver. His name's Lewis Hamilton. Why am I saying I'm pretty confident it is?
You feel that?
I feel like Americans were
British, first of all.
Ignorant. It doesn't, like, hurt me. You know?
How do you feel Americans perceive the British, first of all?
They kind of look down on us.
You feel that?
I feel like Americans think like they're on top of everything, and there's always competition between the two.
So do you feel like the British have a chip on their shoulder a little bit because of that?
Yeah, a lot.
What do you think the British are better at than Americans?
Yeah, polite, really.
More polite?
Yeah, more talkative, more helpful.
More helpful? The British are more helpful?
Yeah, than Americans. But Americans are nice, they're funny, got good music.
Got good music, okay. Well, the British have good music too, man.
Americans are taking over the music scene.
But I mean, come on, there's a lot of great British music.
Again, not to American, I would say British music, like per capita, might be even more. I would say is more popular, or might be even. It's hard for me to tell, but the amount of bands and singers that I always just assumed. I knew the Beatles. I never assumed the Beatles were British, right? But that's because there's a lot of clips of the Beatles like talking themselves. But it's really difficult when British or Americans are singing to tell who is British and who is American. And the amount of people that I thought were huge, iconic American singers and music groups and bands turned out to be British. And so I don't think that's a great point there. And this is just me, but I don't think if you asked Americans about Britain that they would say condescending things. And so I think that might be a little bit of people like imagining it, or maybe not. All right. I think you'll have your drunk kind of younger college students being like, yeah, America, woo. But I think people have a tendency to sort of push into their own stereotypes about them. It's almost like, oh, this person thinks I'm that, and you want to just act that way. I feel like I sometimes do that. Sometimes I'll be like overly patriotic and say stuff just because I know that's a stereotype of America. So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I don't think that there is a like, oh, Europeans. I think it's probably the opposite. So I don't see the looking down on. I certainly don't look down on Brits or Europeans. If anything, in some cases, I look up.
Here's the thing that I think is going on here. We are not the same, the Brits and the Americans, but we sure have a lot of similarities. Compare us to the Japanese or to Native Americans or to Ethiopians, and the differences between Americans and the British
any country
seems
other than
small. We're like blood siblings in the village that is the globe.
So here's what all of this started to make me think of. There's a concept in psychoanalysis. I'm going to read you the definition, but it's called the narcissism of small differences. This comes from Freud.
The narcissism of small differences is the idea that the more a relationship or community shares commonalities, the more likely the people in it are to engage in interpersonal feuds and mutual ridicule because of hypersensitivity to minor differences perceived in each other.
I think that's definitely true and pretty obvious. Why would you go and brag to some country that isn't going to care about that? There's a reason that you want to like show your big brother, maybe not. If you're like this, if you're like you're a really good rugby team or whatever, you're not going to go brag to people who aren't rugby fans. They're not going to care. And so I'm just bringing that up as an example. So yeah, of course, you're going to want to brag to people who know what you're talking about. Because you feel like that's what bragging is about, is showing someone up that you think will see that and be sort of jealous or like know what you're talking about. That makes complete sense.
You see this all over the world, between the Argentinians and the Chileans, for example, between the French and the Belgians. And indeed, I think this is what is happening between the Brits and the Americans. But at the end of the day, I feel like we make the little things that make us different much bigger than they really are.
The way that we speak and the words that we use.
Yeah.
And again, we were talking about this, weren't we?
Yeah.
About
We've been talking
words.
about things like autumn versus fall. And it's like that's often something that people like bring up, and for some, well, it's because it's a simpler word, and it's like, fall, American.
You guys don't
classic.
say fall?
No, we don't say fall. We say
interesting.
autumn.
Okay.
So this is autumn.
See, this is one of the word differences that is very slim. Like if you say autumn, I won't even bat an eye. I'm not going to be like, huh? Don't you mean fall? Like, no, we use autumn as well.
But you can say autumn as well.
All right, before we go any further, I want to quickly thank the sponsor of this video, BetterHelp, whose support has made it possible for me to take this trip to the United Kingdom, as well as bring a videographer with me to film these interviews.
If this interests you guys, please make sure to use his promo codes and his stuff. By the way, BetterHelp, I think, is a great idea. I've gone to see therapists and it's helped, but I think 90% of therapy is just voicing your stuff. And so I feel like being a therapist might be like the easiest job ever, because so much. I can go on a whole video about stuff like this, but yeah. Anyway, so
these videos
let's
take
go.
a long time
Use
to
his links,
concept
guys.
and organize and bring to life, and I hope it's visible in the production value that I am really pouring myself into making these videos as high quality as possible. And all of this is possible thanks to sponsor support like from BetterHelp. I am a big believer in therapy. There are a lot of people in my life that have been deeply affected by therapy, myself included, and what I really like about BetterHelp is how flexible it is. First of all, there's flexibility in who you're speaking with, as in you can freely change therapists if you're not clicking with the person that you're speaking with, which I think is super important, because I feel like it's really important for me to feel fully comfortable to be able to open up with the person I'm talking to. There's also flexibility with regards to how you speak to your therapist, whether that's via text or video call, depending on what you prefer, as well as when and where, right? Because this is all remote, and so you can easily adapt it to when it fits into your schedule. Furthermore, all of this is a lot more affordable than traditional therapy. And I like that all of these things make it so that it's not something that's only accessible to the wealthy. In a crazy and chaotic and changing world, it feels important to me to be able to have access to something like this. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check it out. Otherwise, you can just go to betterhelp.com/NathanielDrew. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gives you 10% off your first month when you sign up with BetterHelp. Having said all of that, thank you, BetterHelp, for supporting my work. And now, let's dive back in.
I didn't even have to to edit that. I got back perfectly in time.
Thank you, BetterHelp, for supporting my work.
My bad.
And now, let's dive back in. Personally, when I come to the UK, I have the impression that I've come halfway across the Atlantic, not just off the coast of continental Europe. And by that I mean, culturally, it feels so much more similar to the life that I had in the US. The convenience of life, the speed, the capitalism, the language.
Everyone speaks English. Everyone's like got the same sort of core values. I'm not necessarily a big Christian person at all, but we all come from this like Christian-based countries. America and Australia are English. There's some things that happen in history, but at the end of the day, we're kind of all the same group of people in that regard.
Culturally influenced.
Culturally influenced by the same group. So I personally don't see many differences at all.
I mean, I've got wonderful American friends who I adore. So that question for me is a difficult one because I think they're great, they're fantastic. I think the differences in the way our language is, in the way we use different words, that's where there's a difference.
So pretty minor.
Yeah.
Do you think that sometimes some of the British media or the portion of the British population that looks down on Americans, is it a way to deflect some of the issues that exist here? Could that be said of all societies?
Yeah, you can say that of all societies, but you can also say that about the media. They're always distracting, aren't they, from topics, whatever it is.
America's seen as very alpha male. If you think about it in terms of masculine and feminine, there's an alpha maleness to Americans. And maybe it's just the way they speak, the accent, but you don't really have that sense of Britain. I think there's a stereotype of the repressed male, that soft-spoken.
Considering we're like right on the edge of Europe, we have more in common with America in many ways than we do with the rest of Europe, which in theory is where we should be more aligned.
You could say the same with Britain and Australia, and they're on the other separate sides of the planet. So, yeah.
And I think there's sort of something that can feel sort of slightly odd about that, you know, like with the whole Brexit thing, breaking away more from where we're most closely connected to and sort of being in a situation where, you know, we're going to end up with chlorinated chicken instead.
There's this tendency to think of Americans as just, you know, they're simplistic, really.
Are you, like, annoyed by the Americans here?
Sometimes.
I wouldn't say.
Depends how they are.
Now, the interesting thing is, I love to drag the US through the mud and criticize it for all the things that I think it deserves criticism for. But the second the Brits start criticizing me or the US, you have nothing to say. Kind of like, I can criticize where I grew up, but you aren't allowed to. And the
Yes, that's yes.
British, in my opinion, are doing their version of the same thing, criticizing themselves to no end, but no one wants an outside opinion. Maybe we all do this. I think we all do this.
I think this is gonna maybe trigger some people, okay? But it's okay. I think that America. How do I say this in a way that, okay. I think America is confident, and so it doesn't mind being made fun of. Does that make sense? And so we don't really have a resentment when other people criticize us, because I think that, like, I like my country. I know we have, but I'm confident. I don't have this kind of, I don't think here it is. I don't think Americans have a lot of insecurities about their country in places like power and influence. And so even though we can get on it, like, at the end of the day, we can tear our country apart and say how, you know, healthcare is awful and the prison system is terrible, and still be fine and not be like bitter at the end and being like, wait, what about your country, right? Where I think a lot of other countries would do that. So we have a ton of problems, but I think that we are confident enough in our country that we don't mind being made fun of. Does that make sense? If you think I'm one person, but I think that is one little thing. And like the Truman Show reference I made, I feel like America is very open on the world stage, or very, like, a lot of people know America, and I'm sure Yeah, I don't know what I'm saying. Okay.
It's like pointing at someone else's flooding house when your own house is on fire.
So I lived in America for 6 years. I lived in California, Alabama, and Oklahoma for 3 years. Everyone hears my accent and is like, oh, where in America are you from? I'm like, bro, I'm actually from Australia, but then they give me their little opinions on American stuff. So I've actually had to play defense a couple times since I've been out here.
Are you serious?
I'm so serious. I'm so serious. Because they talk about guns or they talk about this, but they don't have like a very good understanding, not just English people, this is people around the world, even in Australia, of the history of America and why those things became what they were. People trying to, you know, throw rocks and then hide their hands.
Yeah.
They don't want the blame to be on them, so it's easy to put it on the big superpower that is on everyone's TV.
Exactly. No, I don't think anyone feels bad about making fun of America. I'm an idiot. I clicked but yeah, I think what he says is definitely true, and it's the only thing that's a little annoying sometimes is when, you know, America has a lot of problems, prison system, education system, healthcare, a lot of big problems. And then, like, you can make fun of America for that stuff, but America feels like it can't really punch back, because if it does, then you're gonna, like, it's like, what? So that's a little weird, I think.
My perception is I don't consider Americans necessarily lesser in terms of like lifestyle, culture per se. I just think it's a bit more apparent than it is in the UK, but the UK is just as problematic.
There's always sort of a sense in the past that like America was sort of, you know, 2 decades ahead of what was happening in this country. There is a sense that we're getting closer in a time frame.
I would say younger generations tend to be a bit more, and the only word I can think of it is shameful of the heritage. I think it's a lot of things from like colonialization and things like that. There tends to be a lot more shame around it.
We're a small island, right? So we've got a small island mentality, but because we've got a small island mentality, we've got to overcome it by kind of that impression that we're the best. And I think that's changing, though. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a total reflection of society now, but I think historically it has been, of course. Let's flip the question. How are Americans perceiving the British?
My answer to that is there is a power dynamic going on, and for better or for worse, the U.S. is much more of a world superpower right now. So I don't think that the U.S. feels threatened necessarily, like competitive with Great Britain. Because of that, I think there's kind of like a, they're cute, you know what I mean? Like they're Harry Potter and James Bond and sophisticated and, you know.
Use words like autumn.
Exactly. But I also think that there's also a major degree of ignorance. Like the U.S. is so self-involved. We're not even paying attention to what's going on elsewhere in the world. So there's not even enough to form an opinion, you know?
Now, this video was definitely supposed to be in good fun. I harbor no ill will towards the British. I find our rivalries as human beings across cultures, across nations, to be comical and interesting. It's like an insight into human psychology. And despite all of the, you know, criticizing going on here, I'd like to end on a positive note. I'd like to express my appreciation for a few things that I think the British do better than Americans. Your healthcare system, for one. Also, the Premier League. They say football was invented in England, and if that is true, as someone with Argentinian background, I can only thank you. I also
gotta say, I've seen videos on your gun laws, and they're less restrictive than I thought, and they seem very reasonable. So I'll give you the gun laws seem better. We have the Second Amendment, so it kind of throws a wrench into it, but yeah.
I have to thank you for your incredible music. What a contribution to our collective heritage. It is a foreign idea to me to have a royal family, but I respect the commitment to tradition.
I did move here the week that the Queen died, so it was really interesting to see. I think my first impression of like the British as a public was that of like mourning for their Queen, you know, the 14-hour-long line to go see her lying in state. So I think it was a little bit of a shock. This might sound silly, but how procedural the British can be. I noticed that tends to be, like every British person I've met, tends to be very procedural, as opposed to Americans, I think, are a little bit more, like, dare I say, free-spirited or individualistic. So
I love British. I love Britain. I love British history, and so of course, I would never want a king or a queen over here, but you'll never hear me complaining about the British monarchy being this, you know, very fancy procedural thing. I think it's really cool that you have that.
So, I mean, I think that's not to say that one is better than the other.
And as a final note, we are obviously a world of individuals, and so stereotypes never fully work. Still, I find it's so fascinating to explore the stereotypes and cliches that we have for one another. Not always, but often there is some sort of basis of truth there, or else they wouldn't spread and persist as they do. Anyway, having said all of that, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, please consider liking it, which tells the algorithms to share this with more people. I thought it was fun, and it's a format I'd love to continue exploring. And also consider subscribing so that you can see more of the material that I make. With that, I hope to see you soon.
Really good video. It's a great channel, great content. And I feel like I said most of what I had to say in the video throughout it, and I wasn't surprised. I already kind of knew this, but I liked his approach. I feel like a lot of people either go in and it's very easy to be anti-America and just be like, oh yeah, we suck, all this, and it's very easy to be pro-America, like, oh, we're better than you. And I appreciate just the openness and just wanting to hear people, and I feel like there was some good diversity of views. It wasn't just all like, oh yeah, America awful. Yeah, I think America, there are a lot of people in America that America is kind of a self-deprecating country in a way, in that you'll always have a side of people in America to agree with you on any subject, whether it's America is this colonial giant military bully that doesn't care about the health care of its citizens and just cares about money. Of course, in some cases, you'll be correct. And then some of where, like, yeah, it is a little weird that Americans, like, it seems to me, would you agree here, okay? Do you think that if an American criticized your country, that you would be more defensive than if a different country criticized your country? I wonder there. And look, I don't think I'm completely like 100% like America's the best. I don't think I am. And I'm definitely not ashamed of it. Like, you won't see me, saying like this girl, like, oh, I'm sorry about my accent. I think as long as you're genuine and just a nice person who knows how they're coming across to other people, you don't have to be perfect, but just kind of open to self-criticism. I think people will like you no matter where you come from. So still a fascinating video. I loved hearing how there's kind of a stereotype in Europe that they see Britons as like similar to how Americans are perceived in Britain, not to the same extent. But very interesting. I hope you guys are doing well. Love y'all. Would appreciate any comments, especially on a video like this, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.